I'm Tabitha Biller, one of the specialist autism mentors working as part of University's Autism Team. I'm going to be giving you a presentation today about developing energy awareness. This fits into the bigger picture of managing your energy levels and trying to avoid burnout. In relation to this, you may have heard about strategies such as spoon theory, which there are many fantastic resources on from other people, and energy accounting, which we'll come back to in a future video. Today, we're going to start with developing that initial awareness of your energy levels. We'll cover why managing energy is so important, the concept of autistic burnout, how to recognise it, and then some advice on how to develop a personalised energy battery as a visual resource to help you develop an awareness of your own energy levels. So firstly, why do we think managing energy is an important topic to talk to you about? Well, from our perspective as a support team in a university setting, it's because of all the demands conventionally associated with university life. So keeping up with your academic work, having a social life, seeing your friends, your partner, joining societies maybe, living independently and managing your life admin. So things like cooking, cleaning, laundry, answering emails, booking medical appointments, food shopping. Things that maybe you're having to take principal responsibility for the first time. All these things take up headspace, time and energy, and all students need to make sure they pace themselves to make sure they have enough energy to cover everything. However, when we think in terms of autism, pacing yourself in this way can be difficult because for many people, having an instinctive awareness and ability to assess your own energy levels doesn't come as naturally as it may do for non-autistic peers. This can often be because of difficulties with interoception, which, if it's not a term you've come across before, is the ability to interpret information about the internal state of your body. So, for example, if you're tired, hungry, feeling sick, too hot or too cold, etc. And we'll come back to talk more about this later. So, in addition to what we might call the universal energy demands of university life, neurodivergent students often also experience additional demands, some of which we've included below. So, number one, managing sensory sensitivities. Of course, we know many autistic people experience heightened sensory sensitivities, and there are a couple of ways that we can think about the impact of this. So it could mean the strain of managing, experiencing, enduring an unexpectedly difficult sensory environment. So, for example, if a fire alarm went off during a lecture. But it could also mean the effort required to plan, anticipate and put strategies in place for just the standard sensory demands of a day. So, for example, the commute into uni or maybe a trip to the supermarket. Both scenarios will require a significant output of energy. Secondly, we've got facing challenges with executive functioning or having what you might have heard referred to as a spiky skills profile. So this means strengths in certain areas but weaknesses in others, which can take considerable effort to mitigate the impact of or deal with the fallout from. Then we've got making disclosures or requesting adjustments, which is something that we know can be a considerable source of effort and stress. Reading and analysing social situations, which very much links to the next point we've got, which is self-imposed high expectations. Now we know many of our students have a real perfectionist attitude towards their academic and social lives. So they might be working very hard, very long hours, and also experiencing, the next point we've got on here, high levels of anxiety. So it's thought that 40% of autistic children, adults and adolescents are thought to have at least one and often more than one co-occurring anxiety disorder. We've also got on here masking, so changing behaviours to mirror neurotypicals or suppressing autistic traits to comply with social expectation. And there's lots of literature focusing on the impact this can have and really how exhausting it can be. And then finally, we've got poor sleep. Again, can be another feature of autism, and we know lots of our students experience particularly poor sleep, meaning that what would usually be considered the most conventional method of recharging or replenishing energy levels doesn't always work as effectively for them. So with this in mind, we know that our students face the dual challenge of additional energy demands and potentially having a harder time measuring their impact. Now, as I mentioned, we're thinking about this today specifically in a university context, but it's by no means limited to that and would be equally applicable in a working environment or to general life outside of university. So what happens if energy levels are not managed? We're probably quite familiar with burnout as a general term, but it is important to recognise that in relation to autism, we are referring to something quite specific here. And it's not an area in which lots of academic research has been done, but there are lots of anecdotal experiences now being widely circulated, especially on social media, where people are sharing their lived experiences. And you can find those if you search, for example, for things like #autisticburnout. Now, the study that we've referenced here from Higgins et al. In 2021 was titled Defining Autistic Burnout Through Experts by Lived Experience, and this looked to address this kind of deficit in research by putting lived experience at the forefront of their study. They drew on the contributions of autistic adults with experience of autistic burnout to help create a definition of burnout that could be used both by clinicians and the autism community. The study identified the following as features of autistic burnout. So, significant mental and physical exhaustion, interpersonal withdrawal, a reduced capacity for daily living skills, difficulties with executive function, an increased manifestation of autistic traits, and a reduced capacity to draw on usual coping strategies. And just as a final point, we have that quote there, that autistic burnout is caused by the stress of masking and living in an unaccommodating neurotypical world, which I think really links back to the points covered on our previous slide about the additional demands of being autistic in a neurotypical world. Now, obviously we're aiming to avoid burnout, but that's easier said than done, especially when signs can be difficult to recognise, and as we've said, difficulties with interoception can absolutely make this harder. So we've summarised some of them here, starting with an increased irritability, lack of motivation, perhaps for some people struggling with self-care, physical illness for some people, others might struggle with speech or verbalising what they're trying to convey, a need for increased processing time, perhaps finding social interaction more draining than usual, memory loss, increased exhaustion, difficulty with emotional regulation, struggling perhaps for some people more than usual with interoception, an increased reliance on stimulants, for example caffeine, an increase in anxiety and possibly low mood, difficulties with coordination, and an increase or potentially decrease in sensory sensitivities. This isn't to say that this is going to look exactly the same for everybody, and you might find it useful to take some time now to look through these and think about, is it something that you've ever experienced? And if so, which of these do you think apply to you? Right, so now we're coming on to thinking about strategies to help with developing awareness, because this is going to be the first step towards being able to successfully manage your energy levels. We've mentioned that difficulties with interoception might make this harder. So for example, I've spoken with students before about knowing that they feel bad, but not being able to identify what that bad means specifically. So is it that they're tired, or might it be that they're hungry or possibly thirsty? In these situations, it can be useful to have resources to help, especially visual ones, and that's what we're recommending here is an energy battery. So it's a way of envisaging your energy levels, both physical and mental, as a battery that can be drained or recharged according to what activities you do. Now the aim is to stay in the green section, with the yellow and orange indicating that you're starting to run too low and need to prioritise recovery. The key to making the energy battery a useful resource is to personalise it so that it's meaningful to you. The example that we've got on this slide is one that I've worked on with students, specifically thinking about mentoring sessions, but you can make it specific to whatever context that you think will be most useful. This one can be quite a good general template to use if you're not sure where to get started with personalising your own though. The battery is broken down into 7 sections to try and help us to reflect on the subtle differences at each stage. It's designed to help those whose awareness might be starting at fully charged and out of energy, but perhaps feel less confident identifying the differences in the stages in the middle. The idea is that by developing an awareness of when the yellow and orange levels are being reached, we make it possible to take action to help recharge the battery, or to stop it dropping any lower and avoiding the red. And recharging and recovery activities are a theme that we're going to come to in our next video. So I'll just have a quick read through the definitions we've got here. So at the top we've got 7, feeling fully charged, feeling well rested, positive, able to focus on what I need to do. Next then we've got 6, so still having a lot of energy, already used some, but still having plenty to handle a potentially challenging situation. By the time we've got to 5, that's a reasonable level of energy, enough to tackle a new situation, perhaps some minor challenges. By the time we get to 4, that's the last of the green sections starting to run low, and at this point might need to start taking some steps to preserve energy. So for example, having a low demand session in a mentoring context. Then we've got 3, the yellow sections, that's starting to run out of energy and needing to think about how to preserve what's left. So that might be finishing a session early or again lowering the demand. Number 2, the orange section, running very low, perhaps could manage some essentials, so maybe, for example, preparing food, but really rest and recovery, it's going to be essential to have that planned. And then by the time we get to the red, that's 1, very nearly out of energy. Rest and recovery absolutely needs to be the top priority here. So where to start with personalising your own battery? Well, my suggestion would be to include some or all of the following. Warning signs or physical symptoms. These are things to look out for to indicate what energy level you might be at. These could be physical symptoms like yawning, or maybe getting grumpy, perhaps finding it hard to focus or make decisions. I know that's definitely a big one for me. We have included these because it's often easier to identify what you do than how you feel. So I know I have one student who would start singing in the middle of me talking, absolutely not intending to be rude, but it was a really useful indication that their brain was actually somewhere else entirely and we needed to start finishing the session off. Example situations. So these could be an example of situations that have impacted energy levels in the past, for example, like how you feel after a 2-hour lecture, or it might be previous examples of when you were at this level of energy before. And again, often easier to identify similarities with the previous situation because it's much more kind of concrete and tangible than just a feeling. Again, another example, I have a student whose symptom of being in the kind of orange or red levels is that they are quite emotionally volatile and easily overwhelmed. But that on its own is quite an abstract concept, whereas if we root it in the example of the time when she saw a blackbird in the park that she thought looked sad and that made her cry, that creates a much more direct and easily identifiable link. And then finally, action to take in response. So this might be things like recovery activities to help recharge those energy levels, or it might be, again, lowering the demand of the rest of the day to stop energy levels dropping too much further. So, for example, things like doing the bare minimum of life admin. So it might be that I've got enough energy to make myself dinner, but not to go shopping. So I'm going to have to make something simple with whatever I already have in. Now, this process is something that it can be very useful to get another person's help with. So that might be family or friends, perhaps a mentor in a university context, because again, it's often easier for other people to spot signs as an external observer. So, for example, another of my students mentioned that their lecturer had come up to them after one of their sessions to ask if they were okay. And my student wasn't, but they weren't sure how their lecturer had known that. So we talked through some of the indications that I thought they might have picked up on. So that was that this student was kind of sitting more hunched over, kind of looking a bit defensive. They were making less eye contact than they normally would, speaking in more of a monotonous voice. And none of these things were things that they were aware of themselves. So it can be very useful to get the input of somebody who knows you quite well to make some of those connections or to help you make them. And the battery can be a really good resource to use with other people if you're kind of wanting some help or some prompting while you're building up your awareness in the beginning. So really now it's over to you. Based on what we've covered in the previous slides, what are the things that you think it would find useful to include on your battery? Bear in mind that it doesn't just have to be a battery. I know one of my students who was a particular fan of Doctor Who decided that he was going to add in different incarnations of the Doctor to help him think about which level of energy he was at. And I have a feeling that Matt Smith's doctor was probably at the top of that particular battery. And it's also okay if you can't fill in all of the levels straight away. As we said, it might be that you start with level 7 and 1 and gradually build up an awareness of the levels in the middle, perhaps with help from other people. So that's it for this video. We've got another couple of videos coming up about energy awareness, as we've said. One about using your energy awareness, and another specifically about energy accounting as a way of keeping those energy levels balanced. So do keep a lookout for those if this is something that you think it would be helpful to find out some more about.